My name is Sonya. I'm founder of Nave. We help Agile practitioners build predictable delivery workflows and deliver customer value on their commitments without overburdening their teams. And today, I would like to spend some time to talk about the 3-step product management guide to setting and managing goals using your past performance data. And without any further ado, let's get started. So life is busy, and all the time we are struggling and we are shuffling between wishes, needs, and duties. And it's just not possible to do all of them at once. It is how time and space limit us. So why do we lean on the illusion that a long list of tasks will get shorter if we start several of them at once? To-do lists always have more to-dos than the team can cross out at a given time. Priorities always emerge. The more productive the team is, the more work is thrown at them. There are a few people joining in. I'm going to just let them in. So essentially, my point is, this has a short-term effect, and it leads to stress and overburden. Eventually, people lower their productivity and the whole business suffers. We start losing customers instead of gaining new ones, even though we worked so hard. And the best teams are highly motivated to perform. They show engagement, professionalism, and dedication. And when unrealistic goals and impossible demands take place, though, their active engagement leads to rising levels of stress, and their overall productivity and efficiency begin to drop. Burnout is a state of chronic stress, and it doesn't appear suddenly. Everyone experiences stressful days from time to time, and this alone won't cause burnout in your team. Burnout symptoms start to appear after prolonged periods of excessive demand and too much workload and elevated stress levels. So setting unrealistic deadlines introduces the risk of burnout. And letting your workers burn out would be a huge waste. It is a continuous business struggle finding and attracting highly committed and engaged individuals anyway. So introducing these individuals to your internal processes and the ins and outs of your business, it is a big investment. By exposing your employees to commitments they are not able to meet, you run the risk of losing your most motivated and hardworking people. So pursuing super ambitious deadlines, either pushed by the team or either pushed by the management or applied by the team itself, it has a far-reaching negative impact, not only to your customers, but on your employees as well. Impossible deadlines mean it's unlikely that your team will be able to achieve them, and so they will often miss targets. If they regularly fail to deliver in time, the question on the table will be, why is the team underachieving while they have been forced to push themselves to their limit to meet unrealistic expectations? So meeting a deadline is a motivational booster. However, if your team constantly misses their deadlines, they will feel like this as well, like they're not achieving. Your employees need to know how their work brings value to your company. They need to see how their efforts contribute to the business success. If they don't, this may impact their self-esteem, motivation, and engagement, which would damage your company's bottom line. And in fact, voluntary turnover is a problem that's costing the US economy $1 trillion per year. According to Gallup, there is a study that has proved that. And this problem is self-inflicted by organizations. If staff feel like they can never and will never be able to meet your expectations, they may realize their only option is to resign. Not only do you lose up to 2 times their annual salary in turnover costs, but all their expertise and knowledge of your company walk away through the front door too. You may feel like taking as much work as possible promises the best outcomes for your company. But excessive demand and setting unrealistic expectations not only affect your employees' physical and emotional health, but it can also have a disruptive effect on your business. It causes lower productivity, poor efficiency, and delayed deliveries. And when impossible deadlines take place, your team will be forced to sacrifice the quality of their deliverables while they're in the throes of full-fledged burnout. They will rush tasks and cut corners, causing defects and poor quality outcomes, despite the fact that they're working even harder to meet their commitments. On the other side of the medal, when they face unrealistic expectations and take the time to finish their work with precision and quality, they will regularly fail to deliver on time. And in the end, our clients are those who have to wait longer to receive what they've requested. And from a customer's perspective, this is a complete disaster, as they have little to no predictability and very slow service times. Usually what's happening, they start looking for alternatives on the market, putting pressure on our economic situation, which in turn forces us to accept even more requests and setting up even more unrealistic expectations to remain cost-effective. Can you see how this vicious circle can result in a very uncomfortable situation? When it comes to the big question, when will this be done? There is an expectation of having a single certain delivery date as an answer, and people tend to provide it. The fact is, people feel more comfortable being wrong than uncertain. And may I ask you guys to mute yourself? There is a little bit of background noise. Thanks a lot. So the fear of uncertainty is a cultural problem. And Professor Gert Hofstede, a Dutch population biologist, conducted one of the most comprehensive studies of how values are influenced by national culture. He defines 6 dimensions of national culture, one being the uncertainty avoidance index. The index is scaled from 1 to 100. The higher the index, the more uncomfortable to uncertainty you are as a society. And countries exhibiting strong uncertainty avoidance index maintain rigid codes of belief and behavior and are intolerant of unorthodox ideas. Based on that research, we rather provide a single certain delivery date that's wrong than remain uncertain. And traditional deterministic thinking has installed deep roots in our mindsets. We have been committing to single certain delivery dates for so long that being uncertain feels so very uncomfortable. And the biggest problem with deterministic thinking is that we know what will happen in the future. We assume that we know what will happen in the future with 100% certainty upfront. And 100% certainty for the future does not exist in our world. Alas, no one has invented the magic crystal ball just yet. Knowledge work flows through a discovery process. We become more certain as time passes and we gather new information. We can only be 100% sure when we will deliver something at the moment we deliver it. So how can we answer the question, when will this be done? I have a question for you. Can we predict exact future delivery dates despite the unpredictability of knowledge work? Are we capable of predicting the exact time a feature will take to go through the whole process while maintaining the rest of the work in progress? Is it possible to predict that there won't be any additional work coming in between, any defects, dependencies, bottlenecks, or external blockers that might cause a delay? There are two approaches trying to provide the answer to the when will this be done question: a deterministic estimate and a probabilistic forecast. What's the difference? Estimates are predictions based on guesswork, judgment, intuition, or good feeling. The prediction is delivered as a single value. It could be a date or a number of days, for example. An estimate doesn't involve any probability of its occurrence. When you estimate your delivery, you don't know whether there is a 20% chance or 50% chance or 80% chance of meeting your commitment. Forecasts, on the other hand, are based on historical performance data. The prediction is communicated as a range of values and the probability of those values occurring. Forecasting is faster, cheaper, and much more reliable than estimating. And when making business decisions, we are constantly confronted with possibilities whose outcomes we don't know. Getting rid of uncertainty and being in control of everything is simply impossible. The real challenge is dealing with the uncertain and unknown in an effective way, and that's the realm of probability. Using a probabilistic approach to making future predictions based on past performance data increases the predictability of our outcomes. Making probabilistic forecasts helps us maintain high levels of customer and stakeholder trust, satisfaction, and retention. It allows us to define service level agreements with more confidence and deliver value to our customers in a consistent, predictable manner. And when we talk about commitments, they should never be communicated as estimations. Commitments should be communicated as forecasts. They should come with a range of delivery times and the probability of achieving each of them. They look like we expect this task to be delivered in less than 14 days, and we are 85% certain it will be. Or there is a 95% chance to finish this task in less than 21 days. Commitments are not contracts. These are goals, and there is always a chance of them not being kept. The challenge manifests itself when teams have to deal with the unpredictable nature of knowledge work, and they should never be blamed if they don't manage to meet the commitment every time. Think about failures as opportunities for improvement. This approach will boost motivation, engagement, and dedication. It will help you build an environment of evolutionary change and a culture of trust, respect, and appreciation. And if you want to meet your customers' expectations, you should set and manage realistic goals in the first place. Building trustworthy relationships with your clients is the key to long-term success. You need to base your commitments on facts, not intuition. And here is our 3-step product management guide on how to set and manage realistic goals using your past performance data. Step number 1, make a probabilistic forecast. Stop estimating and start forecasting. I will walk you through the approach of making probabilistic forecasts using your historical data. Step number 2, determine the ideal start date range. Start your work on time, neither too early nor too late. We will identify the ideal start date range to increase the likelihood of delivering on time. And step number 3, manage your work in progress to meet your goals. On that step, I'll show you how to establish a dynamic prioritization system that will enable you to keep your commitments. So we spend too much time and effort speculating about the future rather than studying the recent past and using our own performance data. We believe that our new work is so unique and different when in fact it's much more similar to the work we've done already. Looking into our historical data is the best approach to predict what might happen in the future. Probabilistic forecasting is amongst the most effective methods for predicting delivery times with maximum accuracy. And scatter plots can be of great help when it comes to cycle time analysis and making probabilistic forecasts. The diagram displays all of your completed tasks as dots scattered on a plot. It tells you when and how long tasks have taken to complete. By observing and analyzing your cycle times, you will be able to evaluate how fast you're delivering value to your customers. The goal is to reduce the delivery times to an optimal level for your team. And the dotted horizontal lines stretching across the graph are called percentile lines. We use percentiles to establish service level agreements and define the probability of different commitment points being met. For example, the 50th percentile on our scatter plot points to 8 days. This means that half of the tasks so far have been completed in less than 8 days. We can now say that any future task we take on has a 50% chance of being finished in less than 8 days. Do we say that the effort time needed for the work is 8 days? No, we don't. Are we saying that we are going to deliver this item for exactly 8 days, in exactly 8 days? No, we're not saying that. What we're saying is that we will be able to finish the item within 8 days. It could be that it will take less time, but not more than 8 days. And there is a 50% chance of keeping that commitment. And you can also filter your data by priority or class of service. It is highly likely that the 85th percentile for fixed delivery date tasks come with a different cycle time than the 85th percentile for expedites, for example. The results will still be valid. That way, you can provide different SOAs for different work items you're committing. The scatter plot produces a probabilistic forecast. It provides the range of commitments. All of these days are your range of commitments, along with the probability of each commitment happening by using your past performance data. And the main benefit of using this approach is that the probabilistic forecast clearly defines the risk associated with certain outcomes. The percentile lines on the chart, 50%, 85, 95, 99%, communicate the risk you're managing. And the probabilities that it produces quantify that risk in terms of percentages. And the question, when will this be done, is not that interesting anymore. The charts provide that answer for us. The question now is, how much risk are you willing to take? If you want to commit to a delivery time with less confidence, let's say you commit, that you commit to 8 days on the 50th percentile, which by the way is the same confidence level that comes with flipping a coin, you really ought to ask yourself whether you want to manage that level of risk. When we make delivery commitments, we want to mitigate the risk as much as we can. 50% certainty is very low. Ideally, you would like to work with 70%, 85%, or 95% certainty when you're making your commitments. And if you look into the percentiles here, you will see that the last one points to 99%. Remember, there is no such thing as 100% certainty that something will happen in the future. There is no model that provides this level of certainty. And you should always think about your delivery commitments in terms of risk. If you commit to the delivery time on the 50th percentile, you will be wrong 1 out of every 2 times. If you commit to the 85th percentile, you will be wrong 1 out of every 7 times. If you go for the 95th percentile, the risk of failure drops down to 1 out of every 20 times. The higher the percentile you select, the more confident you can be when making your commitment, as the lower the risk of failure will be. Step number 2, determine the ideal start date range. Now that we know the range of commitments and the probabilities coming with each of them, it is time to determine your ideal start date range. And the best chance for delivering on time comes when you make sure you start on time. When you start working on your tasks too early, you are both wasting capacity on work that is not yet due and running out of capacity for work that is due. When you start too late, though, you risk delaying your work and breaking your commitments. The longer you wait, the higher the chance of delay. And in order to identify the best time to start, and you have your due date already set up, look at your probability forecast for the specific class of service you're interested in. The ideal time range to start your work is any time between the 99th percentile and the 85th percentile. Again, there are no assumptions here. You only make data-driven decisions based on your own past performance data. So let's say that your forecast says that there is a 99% chance to finish a fixed delivery date task within 13 days. And there is an 85% chance to finish it within 10 days. And let's say that you need to deliver on November 30th. This means that the ideal time to start your work is between 13 and 10 days before the delivery date, or any time in the range November 17th, November 20th. By initiating your work within the normal start date range, you will have at least an 85% chance of delivering it on time. And by using this approach, you will observe over time that those 10 days already point to your 95th percentile. And the cycle times that the 85th percentile represents, they're going down. By shifting all the percentiles down, you have already improved your performance. By keeping those lines close to each other, you reduce the variability of your delivery times and your workflow, and thus increase the predictability of your system. And the more stable your system is, the more accurate forecasts it will produce. Step number 3, manage your work in progress. You need to manage your work once it has already been started to make sure you can keep your commitments. The secret here is to enable your team to make decisions on their own by following certain prioritization rules that will ensure on-time delivery. And when it comes to establishing a work in progress dynamic prioritization system, classes of service come into play. Classes of service have 2 main purposes: to classify different work items according to their priority, and to clearly define how the items in each class of service should be treated using explicit process policies. By having explicit policies in place for each class of service, you effectively enable your team to self-organize around the work. As an example, imagine all of your servers go down. Getting back online immediately is an extremely high priority, right? On the other hand, code refactoring is a lower priority task. These 2 work items would be placed in different classes of service, and they will move through the workflow with a different priority. Emergencies, hitting milestones, and any other critical tasks can be handled following the established policies, and everyone on the team knows what they need to do in each scenario. And the first step to implementing classes of service is to decide what your classes should be. We recommend starting simple at first and sticking to standard, fixed delivery date, expedite, and intangible. You may find later on that you need to add another class of service or two. Try different combinations to find what works best in your business context, but by all means, don't go for more than 5 or 6 classes of service to make sure the policies are easy to maintain and follow up. Next, you have to define the policies for how each class of service should be treated. Tasks exist in the same workflow and go through the same steps. However, their class of service can affect how quickly they pass through the system. The policies related to each class of service could look like this. Expedite class of service. Critical systems going down and unexpected serious glitches will naturally be treated as a high priority. This class of service is for top priority items that need to be handled immediately. And expedite items are allowed to break your WIP limits, and there must be only one expedite in the system at a time. The expedited work item should go out of the workflow as soon as possible. Fixed delivery date class of service. These are key handovers, release dates, and tasks with a fixed end date that is not likely to change and where the cost of delay is significant. Items with fixed delivery date class of service have a higher priority than standard tasks. They're handled in the first in, first out fashion. Then standard class of service. Regular workflow tasks, features, improvements, the bulk of your work items should be in this class of service. Standard class of service work items have a higher priority than items with intangible class of service. And again, they should be processed using the first in, first out approach by pulling the oldest first. And finally, intangible class of service. This class of service is used to collect necessary but not non-urgent maintenance tasks. They're normally handled if the team has the capacity to do so, but keep in mind that an intangible item can become an expedite if it is neglected for a long enough time. Now, as the start date approaches and you begin working upon your commitments following your explicit process policies, you have to keep track of the age of your work in progress. The age of WIP and cycle time are essentially the same metric, only cycle time is measured against completed tasks, whereas the age of a task is a measure concerning tasks that are still in progress. And tools such as the aging chart offer a detailed overview of where your tasks are in your process, how much time they've already spent in progress. And the colored zones draw the timeline of how your tasks have advanced in the past. For example, the green zones show the times that 50% of your previous work items have spent in each process state. By observing how your current work is moving through the zone, you have a pretty good chance of meeting your commitments. Just make sure your work items don't cross the percentiles you used to define your SLA. The higher the dots, the larger the chance of delay. And usually what we recommend is taking a closer look at the tasks that move to the yellow zone. And these tasks have already spent more time in your process than half of the work items completed so far. Now, even with everything in place, things might not go as planned. Knowledge work is notorious for its unpredictable nature. Lots of unexpected and surprising things happen all the time. So if you've committed to the 85th percentile, for example, and your work item just moved to the orange zone, crossing the 70th percentile, don't fall into the trap of cutting from the scope or sacrificing the quality of your work to be able to deliver on time. Instead, in order to make sure you keep your commitment, introduce an explicit policy to expedite your fixed delivery date task at the moment it goes above the 70th percentile. By expediting a task, you are effectively suspending another work item with lower priority that's currently in progress. Essentially, you borrow time that would otherwise be reserved for another task in order to fulfill your commitment. Keep in mind that expediting work generates flow depth, and make sure that the short-term benefits are worth it in the long run. And by using this approach, your team will have the autonomy to make decisions on their own. By understanding and following the explicit process policies, they will be able to meet their commitments and build credibility as your workflows continuously improve. And in order to evaluate if your improvement efforts are paying off, you need to monitor your due date performance. Your due date performance is a measure of reliability. Furthermore, it's a factor determining the quality of your initial forecast. One more time, the accuracy of your forecasts strongly depends on the stability of your delivery system. Stable systems produce more accurate forecasts. And you can evaluate your due date performance by comparing the time between the start date and due date of a task with the actual time it took to deliver your work. And the due date performance chart can be of great help here. For each work item, the due date performance chart visualizes the predicted time versus the actual time. So the predicted time is calculated as the difference between your commitment point, or the moment when the work entered your workflow, and the due date assigned on the task, while your completion time essentially is the difference between the same starting point and the task's actual done date. And the line plotted through the chart is called a regression line. It runs roughly through the middle of all the data points. The slope of the line is the correlation between your predicted time and the actual time you spent finishing your work. Ideally, it should look like a median. It should start from here and it needs to go like this. And essentially, it helps you, that this approach, this strategy helps you assess the accuracy of your predictions and evaluate how efficiently your system is running. And the most important part of analyzing your due date performance is assessing whether your work has been delivered on time. Your on-time delivery metrics will show the percentage of times that you managed to deliver before your due date approached and how such trends have developed. For example, if you released 10 tasks today, 6 of them were finished on time and 4 of them were overdue, your due date performance for that day would be 60%. And following the product management guide steps back in 2018, we managed to increase our due date performance from 33 to 74% in just 2 months. We improved our on-time delivery by 120%. And 6 months later, we've achieved and we've reached a sustainable due date performance of 98% that we still managed to maintain. By switching from estimating to probabilistic forecasting, starting our tasks on time, and actively managing our work in progress, we eliminated our primary source of delays, setting and pursuing unrealistic deadlines. And we have been producing more accurate future predictions and keeping our commitments ever since, which has ultimately resulted in higher customer satisfaction. I have a special bonus for you today. If you're interested to take this further and understand not only how to make reliable delivery commitments for a single item, but also how to forecast the delivery date of a project or how many items you can commit to in your next release, download our complete guide to forecasting. It is free and you can find it at getnave.com/forecasting. The guide reveals several approaches, explaining in detail how they should and should not be applied to make accurate delivery predictions. You will gain a deep understanding of what tools to use and how to use them to make your commitments. And with that, I would like to thank you very much, and I would love to address any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Sonya. This is normally where we do a round of applause. So guys, unmute, feel free to join me in the applause.
There we go. So much. Awesome. Okay, lots of hands up so far. Laura Hastings, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sorry, that was a clapping emoji, not a hand up, but thank you all the same.
My bad. Okay, they look very similar. Okay, Buga, you have your actual hand up, I think. Feel free to unmute and ask your question. We can't hear you if you are attempting to speak, Buga. I can see that you've unmuted, but I can't actually hear anything. While Buga searches for the microphone, any other questions? There was one earlier in the chat by Haroon. He's unfortunately, he had to leave early, unfortunately, but I'll ask it anyway, because I think it's a really interesting question. Sonya, the question is...
Hello. Yes.
Hey, Buga, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Just give me 1 second to finish answering.
Yeah, I'll mute myself. Thanks.
Thanks, just because I started, sorry. So Sonya, the question is, can we ever get rid of uncertainty or even significantly reduce variability in teams and teams of teams? That was the question that Haroon had.
You cannot get rid of uncertainty. There is no such thing. There is no way that you can predict the future with 100% certainty. What you can do is to handle the uncertain and unknown in an effective manner. That's why we really talk about predictability here. We talk about probabilistic forecasting, because when you're in charge of your management practices and you have your process policies in place that dictate how the work will move through the workflow in order to generate predictable delivery times, to generate predictable delivery outcomes, essentially what you're doing is you are intentionally putting practices in place to make sure that you will deliver in a predictable manner. So absolutely, this is something that can be achieved, and this is something that we've seen quite a lot of times. If you're in charge of your management practices and if you enable autonomous teams and move your focus from managing people to managing the work itself and making sure you're controlling the waiting time in the system, you can effectively achieve that goal. Because when we talk about delivery times, your delivery times do not equate to the effort time your team will spend to deliver the work. In fact, here at Nave, we have more than 10,000 workflows, and we've run an experiment and we analyzed them. It turned out that anything between 60 to 95% of your delivery times is waiting time. It has nothing to do with the efforts your teams are making to get the work done. Anything between 60 to 95% of your delivery times is caused by either bottlenecks in the system or higher priority items that took the priority, or dependencies, blockers, bottlenecks. So our goal is to reduce that waiting time. That's how we are making the bigger impact. That's how we are making sure that we can actually deliver results in a predictable manner. We are controlling the waiting time, and we've seen how the delivery times can be improved with 200, 300% in just a couple of months just by switching, tweaking a little bit of how we manage the work, rather than pushing teams to work harder and to work longer hours. That's never the solution. That won't have much impact on what are your delivery times and how they're moving. You do want to reduce the waiting time in your system. That's how you're delivering predictable results. That's how you're managing the uncertain and unknown in an effective way.
Very insightful. Thank you so much for the answer, Sonya. Buga, I think your microphone works now. Feel free to unmute, buddy.
My mic is working now.
Yeah.
Hi, Ruga.
Okay. Hi, Sonya. So you've mentioned managing work. So
yes.
Yeah, I totally agree about that. Managing work and eliminating all uncertainties and dependencies and all possible risks. I have a note upside in the chat. You might read it maybe later. You've mentioned forecasting. Not push. Maybe push is too hard word, but you're more for forecasting than estimating. But forecasting based on what? Again, how it has to be some unit. So we are forecasting on something. How we can know that this item will be 5 days, let's say, or 8 days. The probability, all those charts that you've had are, yeah, good, but that part was, I mean, it was hard for me to understand how we are forecasting or saying that this task, it might be finished or ready for delivery in 8 days.
Okay.
All those 50 percentile, 85, 90, 95, and 99.
Okay, so when we're making probabilistic forecasts, we usually use 2 metrics to base the forecast on. And it will depend on what you want to achieve, what you're trying to achieve. If you would like to forecast the delivery times of one item, of single item, we use cycle times. Cycle time is essentially the time that the work has taken from the very beginning when it started up until it has been finished. So cycle time will have all the waiting time. It will, if it gathers all the waiting time plus the effort time. So our goal is not to evaluate whether an item is less complex or more complex, or whether it will take 1 day of effort or 5 days of effort. It doesn't matter. What matters is what's the priority of the work item. Because if a more complex, bigger item has the highest priority right now, the entire team needs to focus on making sure that they deliver this bigger item. And even there is something smaller that has been started afterwards, it will need to wait and accumulate waiting time in the system until the bigger, more important item is delivered first. So we use cycle time to base our predictions, our forecasts, when we talk about single item, when we talk about one item. And having the probabilities and using the probabilities, you can decide how much risk are you willing to take. If you feel like the item is super easy, you've done that before, there aren't any unknowns that you expect, go with the 50th percentile, right? If you believe that you have never done anything before like this before, there are plenty of risks associated with your work, go with the 99th percentile. So by using the percentiles, you're communicating the risk you're trying to manage, and the times that you use have both the effort time plus the waiting time in the system. So you're accounting for the uncertainty already based on what has happened in the past. So that's for a single item. When we talk about projects or a backlog of items, or if you have if you need to plan your next release or your next sprint, and you do want to know when something will be done. Let's say that you have a project, there are about 100 items in the scope of that project, and you do want to know when you will be done and what's the probability of achieving that goal, we use throughput. Throughput is the number of items completed for a certain period of time. And in order to come up with that prediction, we run Monte Carlo simulations. I would highly encourage you to download the forecasting guide. All of this is explained in there in a lot more details. But just to give you some details now, we use your daily throughput. The simulation will use your daily throughput to predict how many items you will be able to deliver on a daily basis. And it will run millions of times to actually come up with the frequency distributions of what are the possible outcomes that may happen in the future. And it will associate the percentiles with every delivery date. And when we work with throughput, what we're not saying is if you have these exact 100 items, you will deliver these exact 100 items by, let's say, 1st of December. That's not what the simulation is telling you. The simulation is telling you, if you have a budget for 100 items, you will be able to deliver them by the 1st of December, but it's now up to you to decide how to use these slots. Because when we talk about projects, there will be more work that will come in between. There will be items that will drop off. You will split your work. It's now up to you to decide how to fill the slots for these 100 items to come up with a reliable, to be able to actually meet your commitment. And there is one more thing here. Continuous forecasting is the secret here. Don't think that at the very beginning, when you make your commitment, your work is done. It's not. There's so many variables that will affect that forecast. You need to continuously reevaluate that forecast in a certain cadence, on a weekly basis, on a bi-weekly basis, whatever, and adjust your course accordingly. So if you see that you're getting off track, let's see why that is. Let's take action. Let's make sure we get back on track. And if it happens that your commitment is just not achievable, let's communicate that early to our customers, because that's how you build credibility, right?
Yeah. So I'll download definitely, and I will check this Monte Carlo and that effort and the item. So is this mostly for Kanban, let's say, or because item can be a small one and item can be a little bit bigger one. So it can be a day or 5 days. So those numbers, how to be mapped. I have some system of my own that we are using with my team, but yeah, it's for release planning and project plannings and sprint plannings. But and again, you've mentioned at the beginning, you're using comparing. You know something is certain, so this might take a day or two. So basically, the waiting time, you are referring to eliminating the uncertainties and all the risks, and the effort is the other part, what we actually know how to do it.
Okay, so first of all, that's not for Kanban, not at all. Probabilistic forecasting is an approach that's really successful when teams are struggling to deliver on their commitments. Okay. So
any
if you
type of work,
any type of work, there is the size of the work doesn't matter, because I've seen items that really need like half an hour to be done, and they spent weeks because they've been blocked by something else. Or they've spent weeks because essentially the team didn't have the capability to actually work on that item. There is so much variability when it comes to knowledge work and that's why I'm saying having a stable delivery system, having a delivery system that's optimized for predictability, meaning having your explicit process policies on how the work should be managed in order to improve the predictability of your system is essential here. Because honestly, if you don't maintain a stable system, nothing will work. You're better off buying a pair of dice and rolling them. You can come up with the same certainty that you can achieve your commitments. So the secret for this method to work, and for any other method of making delivery predictions to work, is to take control of your management practices and make sure that you're managing the work effectively. And often this would mean that you need to get out of the mindset of managing people, managing individuals, because what I'm seeing is that in order to make sure that you fully utilize your workflow and making sure that you're reducing the waiting time in the system, you need to enable some idle time for the people. You need them when you see that your workflow is working and it's operating at full capacity. You don't want to start new work, because when you're exceeding the demand exceeds the capability of your team, you are delaying everything else in average. So the size of the items don't matter in that case.
Okay. In constant monitoring, I definitely agree.
Absolutely. Constant monitoring, managing the work, making decisions based on the insights you collect from your data. Always, and that's valid for everyone here. Every time when you're introducing a change in your management practices, make sure it is a small change, because you do want to take small steps, baby steps, and you do want to start safe for fail, let's say, initiatives, risk-free initiatives. So even if they don't work the way you want, okay, you've lost like what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, there aren't any disruptive changes that you've done, so you can revert it back easily. So when you're introducing changes in order to improve your delivery speed or having some explicit policies in place, always one at a time, and you are evaluating how that change is affecting your metrics and how people are reacting to that change.
Sonya, thanks. Cheers.
You're most
Thank you
welcome.
so much, Buga and Sonya, for the insightful discussion. Alexis, you have your hand up. Feel free to unmute.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks to Buga. He's one of my colleagues, and we've got a couple other people on the call. So, but Sonya, wow, yeah, my brain is my brain's spinning at the moment. I think with everything that you said tonight, that's giving me some really crazy ideas. But I just had a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. Oh, and the one thing I will definitely take away is like rolling dice. I think that's the one comment you made there that's going to make me really think. But yeah, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about, or ask you maybe, I'm not looking for a solution, but maybe kind of a suggestion here about how we can kind of use what you've discussed here tonight when you're working with teams or squads that have got a lot of dependency on one another. So in our organization, you know, we've got a very broad suite of products, and you know, we find ourselves in a situation where there are a lot of dependencies around a particular core product, for example. You know, so every time we go into, you know, kind of planning for a release cycle, you know, we go through a risk and dependency kind of management process. But it's just, you know, how can we, is there anything that we can do with what you've discussed tonight to potentially kind of help us in terms of kind of managing our dependencies? You know, because yeah, the thing is, one thing might be important for one team, and you know, they've estimated it, or I'll use estimate because we don't forecast, but you know, then you know, we need to take into consideration that in order to get that completed or delivered, we need help from another team whose priorities might be different. It can become really crazy. So I just wondered if you had any suggestions for that type of thing.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question, Alexis. In fact, dependencies, internal and external dependencies, are one of the major impediments that contribute to waiting time in the system. And we actually dedicated a major part of dependency management and practices of dependency management in our Sustainable Predictability digital course. It's a constant struggle. And the best thing that you can do is to start managing these dependencies effectively. There is an approach that can help tremendously on that matter. And the first thing that you need to agree on is you need to have priorities associated with your work items. So that's the first thing that needs to happen in order to manage dependencies effectively. You need to know what's the cost of delay associated with your items. Is the item urgent? Does it need to go live right away? Is the item that has a dependency a standard item? It can wait up until a certain time. Or is it intangible? Like if it is delayed, no one actually cared. So the first thing is you need to define the priorities of your work, because based on the priority of your work, you will manage dependencies differently. So let's take a fixed delivery date item. Let's say that your development team is working upon a deadline and the cost of delay is significantly rising after that deadline. It's like you have a customer, you have a contract with that customer, you have a deadline of your project, and if you miss that deadline, they're not doing business with you anymore. So that's a fixed delivery date item, right? The cost of delay is very high. In that specific case, you need dynamic systems. So when we talk about such high risk, we need to plan ahead. We really need to plan ahead in order to make sure that we start the work on time. The way I showed you today is the right way to figure out when you need to start the work. And then use reservation systems to book the capacity of the dependency team. Let's say that you figure out that there is a dependency of the legal team and you need their input when you start working on that item, so they can take the item, they can do what they do, they bring it back to you and you deliver the results. So in that specific case, we use reservation systems. We use dynamic reservation systems. Dynamic reservation systems are, you can think about them as boards, but structured as calendar. Every column in the board is a week. So let's say that you need to start working on an item in 5 weeks, and you know that there is a dependency on the legal team. What you're doing is that you're taking that item and you put that item in 5 weeks in the legal team's reservation system. Then when the legal team is having their replenishment meetings and they decide what are the next things that they will handle in the next iteration, next week, next 2 weeks, they need to use that dynamic reservation system as an alternative backlog. So when they're populating the slots of what needs to be done, they need to take into account everything that is placed in 5 weeks from you in their reservation system. And depending on what's the priority of your dependency ticket, they need to reserve the time to make sure they handle it on time. And again, I'm saying that it really depends on the priority, because if it is a standard item, you don't work upon a deadline, but you still want to preserve the predictability of your system and you don't want to accumulate too much waiting time. What you do, you don't plan upfront for dependencies. You just leave the dependency to actually happen just in time. And at the moment that you discover there is a dependency, again, you place the ticket in the dynamic reservation system of the legal team for their next iteration. So when they plan their work, they pull work not only from their backlog, but from the dynamic reservation system as well, to make sure that they reserve time for your ticket and they handle the work accordingly. There are plenty of details around this. I hope that this is helpful. This gives some clarity. If you're interested to learn more, please send me a note on LinkedIn. And that's for everyone. If you'd like to continue the conversation, I would love to send me a request in LinkedIn and let's discuss all of your questions further in details. But Alexis, send me a note and I could probably give you, I could probably send you some more resources so you can check this out in a little bit more details.
Yeah, thanks, Sonya. I really appreciate that. I think it's the sequencing of the work between, let's just say, two teams that can be challenging at some point. So I'll use it in a software context. So a software development context. So, if I've got two teams, and you've got a team that are responsible for a release or delivery, and they've got their own stuff to do, and you've got another team that have got the same thing but are dependent on team A, for example, it's kind of, I guess it's a conversation that you have to have, and we do have them, but it's making sure that you're sequencing that work correctly, so that team A is able to adjust their backlog of work, so that they're delivering that work that team B is dependent on in like a timely fashion, but also needing to deliver their kind of own product backlog for that release. But yeah, I'll give you a ping. I appreciate your help. That was useful, and appreciate everything that you've said tonight. It really opened my mind a little bit. So thank you.
My pleasure, Alexis. I hope this was helpful.
Very cool. Thank you.